Hey there Star Wars fans, and welcome back to Astromech Productions, a Star Wars and LEGO Star Wars YouTube channel. In today's video, I'll be talking about why the First Order was so much more ruthless than the Galactic Empire. The First Order and the Empire were very similar in a lot of ways, yet also very different. The First Order had some very vicious tendencies, many more than the Empire. So if you want to find out why that was, be sure to watch this video right to the end. The main way that the First Order was different from the Empire was the way they gained control of the galaxy. The Empire emerged from the Republic, a force already in place. However, the First Order did not. They were formed in the unknown regions from the Imperial Remnant and fell under the leadership of Snoke. The First Order controlled a few planets at that time, but only very few. Their goal was galactic dominance, and to achieve that, they had to conquer entire systems, planet by planet, and force them to submit to their will. Due to this, the First Order had to be much more of an army than the Empire had ever been. Not only did they have to seize control of the planet, but with many of the planets, particularly as they moved further towards the core, they faced fierce resistance, both from the New Republic and the Resistance. The First Order had to be merciless and uncompromising if they wanted to gain control of the galaxy. On planets they were invading, they had to be swift and precise, and deal forcefully with anyone who tried to resist. On planets they already had control of, they had to rule with an iron fist to ensure they kept control of the planet, as, due to the fact that they weren't in control for a good portion of their existence, planets could easily slip out of their grasp, and gain assistance from the Resistance and the New Republic. Being totally ruthless was their only option, and one they embraced with pleasure. The First Order regarded the Empire as weak, and although they drew strongly from their ideals and ways, they recognised the fact that they had not the power or strength to remain in the position they had been in, once proper resistance had been formed. As such, the First Order were determined not to make the mistakes the Empire had done, for example, not giving its troops enough good quality training, not setting store by survival rates, and, most importantly, underestimating opposition, and not dealing with new threats quickly enough. This was what had brought the Empire crashing down, and the First Order did not want the same fate to befall them, so took steps to ensure that opposition threats were dealt with quickly and severely. For example, when the Resistance won their first really major victory against the First Order, the destruction of Starkiller Base, they struck back instantly. Within a week, they had reduced the force of a few hundred people to around 24. When the Rebel Alliance won their first major victory against the Empire, the destruction of the first Death Star, the Empire did very little, and as a result, the rebels only grew in numbers. The First Order saw the Empire's ineffectiveness in these areas and sought to conquer them through force and ruthlessness. The third reason that the First Order was so much more ruthless than the Empire was that they had the power to be, and by power, I mean firepower. With huge leaps in warfare technology due to decades of galactic conflict, from the start of the Clone Wars through 2 galactic wars, the First Order had far superior arms and weapons than the Empire. They could cause more destruction and devastation than their predecessors, and if they wanted something, they had the firepower to back themselves up. They were also much better at buying the right kind of equipment than the Empire, and were able to better run ruthless campaigns. And although all factions at the time had access to these weapons, the First Order was particularly effective and brutal at using them. In addition, their troops were much better trained than those of the Empire, better drilled, more loyal, and more capable of ensuring the First Order's rise to power, making the First Order even more deadly than the Empire had ever been. As discussed earlier, the First Order were originally an invading force, seeking to conquer planets to gain control. This meant that, until their later stages, they had no need to act as a government. This put them in a very favourable position. They had no need to care for the citizens under control, no need to provide services, run things. They could essentially do whatever they pleased. As the First Order had no government, they had unlimited power and no restrictions, so they could be as ruthless and cruel as they wanted. When they formed a central government, the First Order had to rein in their violence a lot, but that was close to their end, around the time of The Last Jedi. However, the Empire was always a government, always had galactic control, and, therefore, never needed to use the violence that the First Order exhibited. In history, many factions have crumbled due to having to run a government. They were often very effective at conquering and invading, however, found the end result dissatisfying from what they thought, having to care for the needs of the people, the bureaucracy involved, and have forces that were unfit for the task, as in the case of the Empire, whose Imperial Navy was outrageously large for its main purpose, controlling civilians. This reason often caused these factions to crumble. The First Order did not want this to happen to them, so ensured that they remained brutal, like they were constantly fighting an enemy, even if they weren't. Also, as the Empire emerged from a ruling force, they did not need to conquer a good chunk of the known galaxy, as they already controlled it, but there were just a few systems in the Outer Rim and rebel-controlled planets that they did. As such, the standard trooper was not trained for combat, they were trained as peacekeeping forces. The opposite was true for the First Order, meaning that the troopers of the First Order were much more prone to violent acts than those of the Empire. The final reason that the First Order was so much more ruthless than the Empire was their leaders. The First Order was led by the mysterious Snoke, who we later found out was just a puppet of Palpatine, literally, whereas the Empire was led by the man himself, Palpatine. However, although these two were technically the leaders of their organisations, they were not the day-to-day decision makers. In the Empire, this was much more often assigned to the Moffs, and in the First Order it was Kylo Ren and the higher officers. The Imperial Moffs were much more complacent and had a very different style to the First Order. They relied purely on intelligence, they were calculating, they were sneaky and deceptive, very similar to the Emperor himself. However, the First Order leadership was much more cruel and precise, being all about displays of force and violence. Both leadership styles were effective, however the First Orders made them the much more ruthless faction. So guys, comment which of these reasons you think to be the most important. If you want more of these faction analysis videos, be sure to subscribe and turn your post notification bells on. Like to show me that you enjoy these videos. Check out my other Star Wars Explained videos on the end screen now. May the Force be with you, and I'll see you next time on Astromech Productions.